Hello and welcome to Pathfounders. My name is Mike Butcher. I'm the founder and editor. And today I'm going to be interviewing Christian Hernandez, who's the founder of 2150 VC, one of the pioneering climate tech funds to come out of Europe in the last few years. And as many of you might know, Christian was also a founder executive of Facebook in Europe prior to this, and then became a VC. And has definitely been a pioneering partner and VC in climate for many years, but also was really jumping into the space when it was actually unfashionable. But the question is it becoming unfashionable again? Christian, thanks very much for coming on the Pathfounders. Obviously, it's going to be a very big topic this year because Trump's back in power and climate appears to be off the agenda. But let's get the news out of the way, and then we'll get into that. You've raised a 210 million euro fund. It's taking you a few years. Tell us about what's happened, your announcement this week, and what's going to happen next.
Yeah, so first of all, good to see you again, Mike. We've been having these chats in many different guises for many, many years. And I guess back in 2021, we did a similar interview when we announced 2150's existence and the first close back then. We did a first close in the first half of 21, finished closing the fund at the tail end of 21. And what we achieved now, right before the holidays, was a final close on Fund 2. So in 4 short years, we've gone from an idea to 500 million euros of assets under management across 2 funds. So Fund 2, as you mentioned, is 210 million. And we have already done 7 investments out of that fund, which we can talk about across the US, Europe, 1 in Turkey. When we talked many years ago, yes, climate tech wasn't even a thing, as in literally the term was still called clean tech. Climate tech took off in 21 effectively. The IRA happened in the US. There was hope, there was aspirations, there was conferences. And yeah, things have changed specifically in the US in the last year, where that word is no longer a positive connotation. And policy is being unleashed to push things back from where we were even just a year ago.
I know that a year ago you announced your intention to raise this round. Did it become progressively harder as the year progressed with Trump becoming so anti-ESG and anti-environment?
Yes and no. So there's certain investors where they do not want to be targeted in the US. And right now there's a big backlash against anything around climate ESG. And so certain investors that have to be public because they have to disclose what they invested in have shied away from the category. Other investors, for example, we have a US pension fund called the Church Pension Group. It's a 17.5 billion pension of the Episcopalian Church, so the Church of England in the US. They very actively wanted me to tell everybody that they were an LP. They're like, that's our mission. We actually want to back this category. We want you to tell the world that we're still back in the category. But overall venture slowed down, right? There's just been less capital flowing back to LPs and therefore less capital flowing into venture and private equity. And within venture, climate tech has had slowed down in terms of fundraising. There's still a number of names out there that we co-invest with. Bill Gates' Breakthrough, Generate Capital, Lower Carbon with Chris Sacca, who continue to raise new vehicles. We very purposely did not change our narrative. We're still an Article 9 climate tech fund and backs technologies that at scale can A, make a lot of money for our LPs, but B, also have a positive impact.
And did you raise from European funds or European institutions as well?
Yeah, so Fund 1 was primarily European. With Fund 2, we expanded geographically. So I already talked about the pension groups in the US, a number of family offices across Asia, US, and Europe. Our anchor investors were the same in Fund 1 and Fund 2. It's Novo Holdings, which is the 140 billion foundation that owns Novo Nordisk, IFO, which is a Danish sovereign fund, and then a number of financial institutions. It's actually a very consolidated LP base, 34, I believe, LPs. So that implies that the median check was actually quite large.
Obviously, you found enthusiastic investors. And I think one of the interesting things about 2150 VC was that instead of doing something broadly as the first kind of wave of clean tech funds were like investing in solar power and that kind of the wave technology, you decided to do something different, didn't you? You decided to focus on cities. Why was that?
It's part of my own voyage into the space back in 2019. The realization that there was a misallocation of capital between the problem and the stuff that we were backing. So, cities, 80% of the world's population, according to the new way in which the UN measures it, vast majority of the world's energy consumption, vast majority of the world's waste. So if you think about cities and the industries that power them, that is about 50% of all global emissions. Back when we got started, it was receiving about 11% of all venture capital dollars. So that was problem one, misallocation of capital between problem and what we're funding. 50% was going into mobility. And secondly, cities, we have technologies that we can deploy today and scale today to have an impact. My favorite example is always heat pumps. They're literally magical. 1 unit of energy in, 3 to 5 units of energy out. Let's get those deployed as quickly as possible, as broadly as possible today. And there was really very few people focused on this space. So it was an opportunity for us to be a Series A fund in this space where the problem was big and the opportunity was as well, with less competition. Since then, there's been other partners that we've co-invested with who actually either have this as one of their strategies or have actually raised funds specifically for similar focus areas. And to be fair, we need lots more capital in the space.
What sort of technologies have you seen appear that are specific to these cities? There was a prop tech boom a few years ago talking about greening of buildings. But how much of that kind of thing moves the needle, and what kinds of breakthrough stuff have you seen and invested in?
Yeah, so the other thing that we did from the beginning is we're quite thematic in the problems that we try to go solve. So we do these, we call them deep dives. So big problem, what causes the problem? How could you solve it? Who's working on it? That generates a deal flow. And about 2/3 of our portfolios in Fund 1 and Fund 2 came from those deep dives. So for example, first problem that we looked at was cemented concrete. It's the world's largest problem. It generates about 7 to 8% of global emissions. And we're not slowing down, right? We're literally pouring concrete like it's water around the world. In Fund 1, we did 2 investments in that space, Carbon Cure in Canada, Biomason in the US. In Fund 2, we already have a number of investments in that space that have not yet been announced. It's an unsexy but big problem that is perfect for us to try and go fix. By the way, when we first did the deep dive in 2020, we only found about 12 startups working on the space. We just redid it last year, and we now found 95. So the innovation into this dirty, unsexy space has definitely taken off.
I noticed that at one point you invested in an electric crane for obviously for building projects. And how did that go?
Yeah, so that company's called Amped Energy. It's based in Singapore. Interesting stat. 1/3 of London's air pollution is actually caused by the construction industry. When I read that stat, I thought it was because it's dirty and there's kind of dust everywhere. No, it's the fact that your construction site, if you look out your window and you see a crane, that crane is likely powered by a diesel generator, which runs all day long. And so that diesel generator is just generating really bad air particles. What AMP does is it electrifies those generators to actually put in a battery power generator in construction sites. When we first invested, now they're also being used in mines. They're also being used in ports. So they've diversified across new verticals to try to decarbonize the addiction that we have for these effectively diesel air polluting machines all over the place. They raised a Series B last year. Last year. We've been investors since 2021, and I'm still on the board and doing quite well. Now going into the US, and actually it's live here in the UK. If you go by the Olympia site, the giant redevelopment, there's 7 of those battery-powered generators inside.
Amazing. 210 million euro, obviously it's a sizable amount, but obviously many people are aware of the scale of the decarbonisation issue, given the climate crisis, which let's all acknowledge that scientists have all agreed on to a 99.9% extent. The issue, though, is that going to be enough? And what kind of fellow travellers in terms of funds do you have to come in and co-invest with you, alongside you? Either you lead or they lead, or you co-invest. Has there been a cooling of the environment because of obviously the US administration being so cool itself?
Yeah, no pun intended about the cooling, right? We need more cooling. No, that's, when I started doing this, it was a moral imperative, right? Using something I've been doing for a while, which is a tool of venture to identify and scale solutions that could have impact at scale. Fund one, 200 million deployed into 20 companies. We're already mitigating about 1 megaton last year, actually in 2024. We'll do the report this year, see how much we mitigated last year. If only 200 million can actually start achieving megaton level scale of impact, that gives me some hope. By the way, we need to be mitigating 25 gigatons, 25 billion tons by 2030. Little secret, we're not going to get there. But we need to scale out these solutions megaton by megaton around the world. So the challenge is these companies, in some cases, are CapEx heavy, right? They need to build physical stuff to replace bad physical stuff. So a couple of realizations. To your question on who the fellow travelers are, our biggest co-investor to date is Breakthrough Energy Ventures, the fund set up by Bill Gates. We've done 6 with them across geographies. We've done 3, 4 maybe with Energy Impact Partners, which is the US European fund. We've done a couple with Lower Carbon. We've done some here in Europe with ETF, which is kind of the OG of climate tech in Europe. And then a long tail of others. Some are generalists, pure software. Others are climate funds. So that's at the Series A, Series B when we come in. Then who comes in next? Lightrock here in the UK, Generation, which is Al Gore's fund. In the US, there is B Capital, which is Eduardo Severin's fund. So there's not a long list, but a number of other players that can come in after us. And then the other important part in climate is that a lot of the funding for these companies is not necessarily going to be equity. It's not necessarily going to be venture capital. So in our portfolio today, for every euro that my companies have raised for equity, they've raised 0.75 euros in debt. And this is not government grants. This is actually Barclays, HSBC, a BlackRock entity, giving loans for working capital, for factories, for asset financing. And ask me in 5 years' time, I think that ratio is going to be much bigger. I think they will raise much more debt than equity to actually scale up. We're talking about trillions needed per year to achieve the decarbonization ambition. I can move the needle a little bit, but we need a much bigger pool of capital, and that doesn't necessarily have to be venture. Actually, will not only be venture.
So do you think that there's going to be more of an IPO trajectory for some of these companies? I think certainly in the terms of the context of the US going so cold on ESG, literally deleting the word sustainability from government documents in the US. Do you think that there's going to be different kinds of exits for these kinds of companies and in different kinds of markets?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, be it climate tech or general VC, right? An IPO is not the usual exit route. Like, you need to be of a certain scale, especially to float in the US. So where do we think the exits will come from? One is, yes, potentially one of them goes public. And by the way, when we back a company, we're backing a business plan, not necessarily just a do-good thing, right? So this needs to be a company that can achieve scale, revenue, profitability, EBITDA, God forbid. So yes, there might be a public exit. 2 is private equity, where a lot of these companies look like the industrial stuff that PE is used to backing, and every single private equity fund has raised a 3, 5, 7 billion climate fund. EQT has one, BlackRock has one with Temasek, KKR has one on the infrastructure side. So that's a natural potential exit path. And the third is actually the incumbents. I called a number of my CEOs the day after the Trump election just to check on how they were doing. And one had the right answer. He said, I've never wanted to be called a climate tech company. I just wanted to make a product that my customers saw as better, cheaper, and faster, which happens to do good for the world. So there's still corporate innovation that needs to happen. A lot of corporate innovation is now happening through acquisitions. We actually have seen a number of these corporates co-invest with us on cap tables and become distribution partners for the companies. We have a company, for example, called Luxwall. They make hyper-efficient glass out of the US. They just signed a partnership with Saint-Gobain, which is the largest glass manufacturer in the world, where Luxwall's technology is being licensed to Saint-Gobain to make highly efficient glass out of their factory in France and ship it across Europe. We expect a lot more of that to happen as these technologies mature. And who knows where that goes.
So in other words, instead of perhaps 5-10 years ago, you might have said this. The storytelling around some of these companies, such as glass, might have been, we save so much CO2 with this hyper efficient glass production process, and now the storytelling is about hyper efficiency and cost saving. Is that the optics that you're going for, having to go for now?
I mean, I think the selling point was still always the efficiency gains, right? So there's this notion of a green premium that people are willing to pay more for something that was better. And that's not really the case, not at scale. Maybe you do it for one project to be able to show it off, but to actually be able to replace glass, double pane leaky glass with something new, you have to be at price parity. It has to be much better. And the problem with glass specifically is the person that buys the glass is not the person that benefits from it. So the developer, the retrofitter of the building is not the tenant that's going to pay the lower energy price. So the buyer needs to see price parity because the benefit's going to accrue to somebody else. So yeah, I think a lot of the focus around is around energy efficiency, electrification, as we try to wean ourselves off, especially in Europe, natural gas from eastern parts of the continent, and then being able to ensure that electrification has the grid infrastructure to power.
I see. So there is a little bit of a change in storytelling, but also it's quite clearly it's a sustainable business rather than just a nice to have. I think that many people listening or watching might also be interested in the storytelling to LPs. You mentioned in the US. How sustainable is that over the next 2, 3, 4 years? Obviously, you've got this fund now. Eventually, you'll want to get to another fund, I presume. Do you see the same kind of storytelling working with those LPs, or do you see the efficiencies kicking in and the numbers adding up?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, we very purposely did not link the social impact or the sustainability impact that we achieve to our carry, which many impact funds do. I always wanted to be evaluated first and foremost as a venture capital fund, right? Competing with many of our friends who actually do software or general technologies, which means that by fund 3, I better start returning cash to my LPs, have exits, have this mythical thing called DPI, meaning cash back. And that's what I'll be evaluated on first and foremost. Secondly, however, there is a subset of LPs that specifically backed us because we're what's called an Article 9 fund, which is a EU designation for funds that will only invest in positive outcomes. And they had sleeves of money from their clients or from their mandates to specifically find and back Article 9 funds. And we were evaluated because we're an Article 9 fund. We had family offices that had consultants that had specifically tasked them to go find climate funds. One specifically that wanted a climate fund specifically in the built environment. So, I mean, I think the pools of capital are deep, but come 3-4 years' time when we talk about this again, I will have been evaluated on how my company is doing. I mean, today, we're already at a $1 billion+ run rate in revenue across the portfolio. Fine, concentrated in a couple of them that are scaled up, others are still nascent, but still 4,000 employees across the portfolio. These are like material companies of scale. Some of them are, God forbid, actually even gave profitability now. Obviously, then they still need to continue to mature and grow and at some point have an exit. But I can actually say that, yes, we found companies that have sustainability in the corporate sense while having a sustainability impact.
Right, I see. So you're definitely going for these kinds of the optics of that any normal common garden VC would be going for, or certain returns and numbers. Another thing is that we're all talking about artificial intelligence, of course, and you're investing in a lot of quite, hard tech. It's hardware, some of it's industrial processes. To what extent is generative artificial intelligence affecting those industries, and how are they accelerating some of your companies, creating exponential growth, not just obviously in normal common day-to-day processes, perhaps, but perhaps the underlying products and technologies?
Yeah, I mean, we also invest in pure software, right? So only about 40% of the portfolio is deep tech, hard tech. We have a number of companies that are actually applied AI. There's one called Nodes and Links here in the UK that uses pretty advanced AI. The guy literally wrote a PhD, the founder wrote his PhD on this to help optimize the risk mitigation of infrastructure projects. Think HS2, think nuclear plants, think data centers. And it's a pretty advanced AI being applied to that problem set. We have looked at a number of companies using AI models to discover new materials, which I find fascinating. How can we actually use computation to hack chemistry, actually accelerate discovery? There's some interesting companies in that space. Valuations are sometimes a bit wacky, which has scared us away from a couple of them. And then obviously what everybody's talking about, which is the energy demand that AI is going to need. Two interesting points on that. One, I do think that will drive interesting absorption of innovation by the owners of those data centers. So the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazons are seeking to deploy efficient ways of powering their data centers. My favorite example is Microsoft just recommissioned 3 Mile Island, the nuclear plant in the US, for a data center. So you're beginning to see them as clients for some of our technologies to put them into data centers for more efficient cooling, for more efficient, lower carbon construction, to effectively lower the cost of that ChatGPT query. However, misconception is that I think we're over-focused on the energy demand coming from just from data centers. The IEA just came out with a report at the end of last year that mapped out the expected increase in energy load from different sectors. And yes, data centers is big, but that's quite consolidated. That's Slough in the UK, that's Dublin in Ireland, that's Virginia in the US. On a global basis, cooling, so keeping you alive because with air conditioning, is a greater energy load than data centers, 1.3 times. Electrification of vehicles is about 2 times bigger than data centers. Electrification of industry is about 3 times bigger than data centers. So we have a massive problem around energy supply and energy creation, not only because of data centers, but because of all this massive move towards electrification of our factories or cars or homes, which also gets made worse by the energy demand for your ChatGPT query.
Right, yeah, but that's always going to come up, especially in the technology press, isn't it? But energy just seems to come, it just so much of today's discussion comes down to energy, whether it be compute for data centers or lowering the cost of living. And while you're concentrating on cities and other aspects of that as well, as part of your thesis, not all of it, part of it, a large part, there's also such an interesting conversation going on about how fast we can produce new technologies in the energy space. And I've seen things like new molten sand power plants or batteries. I've seen also there's a lot of conversation about SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors. There's also some encouraging science coming out of the efforts around nuclear fusion. What kinds of things that you see, and you must obviously keep quite a close eye on this energy area. What are the areas that you're most excited about? Perhaps the entrepreneurs, the startups that you're looking at in that space.
Yeah, by the way, SMRs are not small and they still take about 10 years to build. But nuclear is definitely a part of it. And I'll disagree with whoever thinks that nuclear is not one of the options that we should consider. My green friends in Germany. Yes, if we solve nuclear fusion, then we have a whole other problem, which is about energy abundance and what the world could look like. And that's always been 10 years out for the last, 30 years, right? But there's some...
Nice problem to have.
Yeah, exactly. So we actually have spent an interesting amount of time on two problem sets. One is energy transmission. When we make the energy and we get it over the pylons to where it needs to go, we lose about 30% throughout the transmission. There's a cool company in Germany, we're not investors, that actually sends little kind of spider crawlers onto the cable and coats it with a specific chemical that actually improves the resistance. So it actually allows for less energy to be lost. Interesting, right? So let's make the current infrastructure better while we build new infrastructure. We did look at a nuclear fusion company, and when I got educated on the space, decided it was a bit too capex intensive for us, but geothermal is actually super interesting. Geothermal, somebody called it the most democratically available source of energy. Literally, you can make a hole anywhere in the world and tap into it. The problem is the cost of that hole. It's cost prohibitive for you to do it in your house, just to go deep and but actually it might not be cost prohibitive to do it at a community scale. And you're seeing a couple of projects around that where there's community geothermal heating. So how can we find technologies that can also lower that cost and actually make geothermal a more accessible way of accessing the Earth's heat?
Literally just drilling a hole in a local neighborhood. It's
a pretty deep hole, so you need a pretty big drill. Like literally, there's a company working on plasma drills to actually go deep for cheaper. So yeah, we do spend a fair amount of time also thinking about that. How can we actually power all this? We have insane amounts of energy capacity sitting literally off of our coast in the UK with offshore wind. It's just sitting there. It's not connected to the grid. And it's going to take several years. I think the current time is 6 to 7 years for it to ever get connected. So sometimes we just get in our own way once even those solutions are already there.
There are a lot of renewable technologies out there like wind and solar. How bullish are you about those scaling and also storage and battery storage?
Doing this job sometimes can be depressing because the deeper you go into it, the more despondent you should be. One of my feel-good stories from last year is Pakistan. So Pakistan went from pretty much a standstill to becoming the third largest consumer buyer of solar panels in the world after China and the US. And this wasn't a government mandate or a government subsidy. It was Pakistani homeowners realizing that solar was the cheapest way for them to have energy because their grid sucks. It's outdated, it's broken. And literally everybody installing solar panels. You can Google Pakistan solar panels and you see these rooftops replete with solar panels everywhere. It's the cheapest energy production worldwide by this point. You're seeing it in every African country. We're just beginning to take off. And when coupled with batteries, it can also actually improve the grid because you can actually offload. And we're seeing, actually, we backed a number of companies, one in Germany called 1,5 that actually is now the largest installer of solar heat pumps and batteries in continental Europe. Yes, the solar production, yes, the energy. And then you can actually even become a trader in and out of the grid where you actually consume when you need to consume, but when you have extra power and the grid needs it, you can actually sell back. And there's been days when the 1,5 homeowners are actually receiving money rather than spending money for their energy.
Well, that would be certainly something to aspire to. Finally, we're entering such a new era with AI and also the combination of AI and robotics. And there are even now factories where robot arms are building parts of buildings and as well as just cars in the way that we've seen cars being built by robots. Do you foresee a very roboticized industry for city building in the next few years, and what do you think that's going to do for human labor?
Yep. So my partner Jacob Bro went to China and just came back freaked out. And it's a bit of a black box for us in the West, right? We really don't know what's going on. Just 150 humanoid robot startups in China. But I'm actually thinking about the robotics in a different way, thinking about Europe, right? So Europe has a problem in that we are literally whittling away. The Netherlands already has over 50% of its working population over 50 years of age. And Germany and France and others are catching up. Because of anti-immigration rhetoric, many of these countries are not getting refilled with younger laborers. So how are we going to produce the things that we need to produce? How do we allow people to work for longer in physical environments? And what role could robotics play in that? So I'm actually taking more of the social angle when thinking about robots. There's a couple of cool startups that actually do exoskeletons, where you can actually wear an exoskeleton to carry heavier loads. Could that actually help you work for longer in construction environments or others? Yes, there's the famous 3D printing company that actually 3D prints homes. It's still cheaper to hire the human labor than it is to hire to rent the robot. So I think the masonry guys are still safe, but there's definitely going to be a cohabitation of robotics with humans to manufacture the stuff that we need to manufacture, and those robots will be trained through some sort of AI models. But I do think that, Japan has been the great example, right? Japan's advanced robotics 2 decades ago were in part needed because of the aging population.
Well, that's so interesting, isn't it? Because yes, in the same way we've seen humans work alongside robots in car manufacturing, that's certainly going to happen in the construction industry, and certainly in your part of your thesis concentrating on cities, it's going to be part of it, I dare say. Finally, just a quick word. What's your view about the venture capital scene right now in 2026? You any quick thoughts about predictions about what will be happening this year, or perhaps some interesting trends you've seen?
Yeah, Mike, you and I have been hanging out with the same people for a long, long time. I was telling you before we got started today that I looked up your first interview when you came to the Facebook office, and it was November 2009. So if you fast forward from back then to now, right, the number of massive European success stories, the Spotifys, the TransferWises, the Supercells, that's awesome. The fact that some of these founders of some of these companies are actually have family offices that I'm now pitching to BLPs, it just feels like completely circular. If you look at the FT over the last couple of months on a global basis, right, Index has had a kick-ass year. Balderton just got featured in the FT today. And that's awesome. I mean, the fact that these funds that started in Europe, or in the case of Index, has been active in the US, in the case of Bulletin across Europe, that these are like not only doing well, they're actually like world leading now in terms of their returns. The FT article said that the Bulletin fund returned 25x to their limited partners. And then that just becomes a flywheel because that means more capital flowing in. The role of the European sovereign funds is undeniable. EIF and the BBB have been the guys who have kind of saved the asset classes through ups and downs, and continue to be quite active. KfW in Germany, iPhone, Denmark, and others. But I mean, it's gotten to the point where European venture is not let me try it out. It actually, for established venture programs, it is part of the mix. And I think that back when we met in 2009 was definitely probably not the case, right?
Well, it sounds to me like you're fairly optimistic then in that case.
Don't you have to be if you're in my business? I mean, I am optimistic about the level of innovation that I'm seeing, the amount of bullishness that I now see in the European ecosystem and around what I do in climate tech, of hope, but also business acumen to go build companies of scale.
Well, yes, certainly I can concur with you that we've seen so much change over the many years, the last few years, certainly since we first met. And I think that certainly with AI now being able to power these small teams and get to scale so quickly, it's definitely going to be Europe's decade, I think. I might as well say that optimistically. Why not? Let's go for it. Christian, it's been great to talk to you. I hope that we'll have continued to chat for many more years to come since our first encounter in 2009. But for now, thank you so much for talking to Pathfounders, and we'll see you around the events and the traps for the rest of the year.